Okay, so you've fairly recently been appointed as chairman of Bioscope and I think also sister company N2S. And maybe
Yes.
it'd just be good to start with a little bit of background as to sort of, where you have come from, up to this
Yeah.
point where you've arrived.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, my background is I've pretty much been in telecoms. Well, I have been all my whole career since I left university. I worked for Toshiba, then I went to work for Cable and Wireless, where I met my very long-term business partner, Nick Raisey, who you've spoken to. Um, we worked together in Cable and Wireless, and then were part of the kind of founding team of a company called Interroute, which Interroute became quite an enormous company that no one had ever heard of. We were responsible really for the arbitrage of high, big scale telephony traffic back in the 90s. And then we sort of evolved into putting dark fiber all over Europe, certain parts in America, that dark fiber today being sold to major telcos to run the huge data revolution we're now all involved in. So it was incredible foresight of our boss back in the day to do that. And as I said, that fiber going down canals, roads, construction sites, it was huge. And the company got sold in 2018 for 2.2 billion to a American company called GGT. So that was kind of that's got us going in the sort of entrepreneurial journey. We did a few other things sort of in between, quite small scale, but telecoms related. And then we built, a very, very substantial data center business, which was called NGD, Next Generation Data, which we grew and grew and grew, and it was a real success story. And then got made an offer we couldn't refuse. So we sold out in entirety of NGD in 2020. And the reason we got to where we are today, where it all sort of maps together, is we were obviously building, very, very substantial data center space, and then realizing into our journey that every so often, major American software companies, telcos, would turn up and do a complete and utter technology refresh, which in our words means Arctic lorries turning up, stripping everything out, taking it away and putting new stuff up because it gets, so heavily worn out, I guess, working the data center environment. So I guess that's we during our process, during our management of the company, engaged with a friend of mine, a guy I know from rugby called Andrew Gummersall, whose family had a recycling business. So as he was a friend, we started doing a bit of business together. Long and short, then after we sold the business, we invested very, very heavily in that family business. Took a very substantial shareholding, and we didn't really buy it for the recycling. We bought it because we were starting to make inroads into a biochemical process to solubilize and dissolve precious metals off circuit boards. So that we saw as revolutionary, completely in vogue with the green agenda. And what happens currently, it is all of our IT waste seems to go on container ships, primarily to the Far East, where it's refined using incineration or acid bathing, really chronically bad things for the environment. And lo and behold, all our precious metals end up in other people's countries. So Japan's economy, China's economy, India's economy get the benefit of all, the stuff we should be keeping here. So we believe with our kind of strategic sort of our strategy is really not only to have a biochemical, safe, clean, green way of solubilization, but we keep precious resources on these shores, which is something Britain should think about in many, many different regards, in my opinion. But we're doing our little bit. So really, we've got two companies. We've got a really well-run now recycling business that's growing, profitable, does major clients, primarily. We've got some of the biggest sort of telco type clients and a few data centers. And that gives us the inventory to then put into the bioprocessing, which is slowly now coming online. We're industrializing the process literally as we speak. And yeah, it's been hugely expensive. We've invested personally 15, Nick and I, 15 odd million to date. So we're really putting our putting our neck out with this one. But the omens are looking pretty good. We seem to be getting there, and think we'll have a really incredible company again.
Okay, yeah, I mean, and you have been busy in terms of, sort of what you've been up to, because I think you've got a partnership fairly recent with Techbuyer, and I think you're also expanding recycling relationships. I mean, you mentioned the telcos, but I think BT in particular, but others. So yeah, just give us a little bit of idea of why those sort of things are important, if you can.
Yeah. We've done a little bit of work with Techbuyer so far. We're at fairly early days. We have had we've had a bunch of sort of major clients give us inventory, and it's quite complicated at first, because you have to basically ICP the equipment you're given, which for the sake of this conversation means breaking it down into very, very small granules, and then doing a sort of electromechanical analysis of, if you like, the powder, which tells you the value of the board and what metals are within the board. So we've only done a little bit of work with Techbuyer, but as we now bring on our industrial sort of size process, we'll be able to take more and more from them as we go forward. And yeah, we give them, the same situation, that the solution really is, we'll take your waste, we'll share the value with you, but we do retain and keep this inventory on UK shores.
Okay, yeah, and also say the telco. So I think you've expanded your relationship with BT. Is that it fairly recent? Is that right?
Yeah, but we've got ongoing, a growing relationship with BT. We've got a couple of other European telcos we're in conversation with, and without giving names away, I'm talking to some of our data center clients that we had at Next Generation Data, who are also interested in us potentially building plants for them.
Okay, and so obviously, as well as you being appointed chairman, I think I've seen that Rob Bolton's joined as group CEO, and you've Rob Edwards as non-executive. So there seems to be, I won't say a refresh, but a renewed impetus when it comes to bringing. Yeah. So how important is it with these
Yeah.
sort of new folks or different roles that they've been given? Whatever.
Yeah, so Rob Bolton is the group CEO. The two sort of primary factories for what we're doing, one's in Cambridge and one's in Bury St Edmunds. So he works between the two. He's got a really strong operational background, highly intelligent, very analytical, and we felt we needed one guy to kind of hold the pieces together rather than having two CEOs. We needed to kind of unify what we were doing, really. So he's exceptionally good, right man for the job, and doing a great job. Rob Edwards is our ex-group CFO. He's incredibly smart, astute. We've sort of brought him out of retirement because we're growing quickly, and he has. Well, he's sort of very, very good at structure, process, good old-fashioned financial management, but he's also, got the debt and equity experience as you grow and take on further plants, and some international experience to boot. So Rob's been a hugely valuable addition to the team, and really glad to be working with him again.
Okay, and in terms of overall, it sounds like the sort of momentum's there for you when it comes to the technology sustainability. I mean, you said about industrializing the process. Perhaps you can just tell us where you are, because I think you do biorefining and bioleaching are your two
Yeah.
technologies. So yes, tell us where you're at with those, if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a factory, a sort of pre-production factory and laboratories in Cambridge, and that site is pretty much full to capacity now. There's no room. So we've got about a 30,000 square foot new site coming online in Bury St Edmunds. So when we get to 30,000 and full, we believe at that point we will have ironed out pretty much all the problems. We'll get we'll get the majority of the problems out of the way by setting that up. And what we then do, it'll be very much like a data center. It'll be a blueprint of a biochemical process from A to Z that we'll map out and put into much larger factories. And I think our intention, the way we see it at the moment, is probably one in Scotland, one in Wales, 3, maybe 4 in England. And when we get that far, we will then go for potentially building sites for American clients in America.
Okay, so that was my next question, the opportunities to grow, but it sounds like you've already got that under control. I suppose another thing to ask you would be, clearly in recent months, there's been a certain sort of pushback politically, at least, sustainability, I won't say it's become a dirty word, but, suggesting that it's, it's costing too much, etc. I suppose just your thoughts. Do you think, despite that sort of political, whether you call it posturing or genuine beliefs, do you think that sustainability is very much part of the landscape moving forwards, or do you worry at all that there will be some element of moving backwards in time, if you like?
Well, I'll tell you, we're very, very simple people when it comes down to it. And when Nick and I formed NGD, we formed a company. We were going to, play in the big boy league, but our mantle really was basically a Rolls-Royce product at half the price of London. And we created just that. We had, the top quality customers in the world. We were considerably cheaper. So what I think I can tell you with Bioscope, we've looked at the costs of incineration. We've looked at the cost of acid baths. We've looked at the cost of logistics to send inventory on container ships to Japan and China. We've looked at all of that. At the end of the day, we're using water and complex bacteria. So the economies of doing what we do have very little, frankly. Competitively, we're going to be an awful lot cheaper, and we have a green solution. The only thing that doesn't work in our favor in an economic model is our solution does take a little bit of time, but as long as you've got space, you've got space, water, bacteria behave themselves. That's not an issue really. So we're going to be lower cost, keep inventory onshore, and give something that doesn't give horrendous gases into the environment and acids into our water system and things, which does happen with these, these foreign refiners.
And what, I mean, you must have some idea of the potential, compared to where you are now, where you need to be, and clearly the world is changing rapidly with all this, AI infrastructure that's being rapidly built out. So just your thoughts, I suppose, as to the potential for, recycling, whether it's in the next couple of years or, as say, I suppose, into the future when all this AI infrastructure needs to be refreshed, etc. How excited are you, I suppose, by that opportunity?
That is a good question. I mean, you would suspect that, with the advent of AI, that an awful lot of tech refresh is going to take place. The thing is, we're focusing really on, high-end customers, if you like, major telcos and major data software companies at the moment. But we want to evolve into the situation where we can take, if you look at any home in the UK, there's, myself, I've probably got 6, 8 laptops lying around. I've got probably 5 or 6, maybe more, 10 old phones lying around, in dark cupboards that never come out. We would like to think at some stage, we not only have major corporation business, but we have a kind of bronze star business for, for anyone really, where stuff could be deposited at a local tip and then handed over to us for for recycle. And there is literally billions and billions of pounds worth of IT in people's houses all over the UK. There was a major article in the broadsheets a couple of years ago, if you need to look this up, but it gave a number, and it was telephone numbers. It was crazy. So that's something we would also like to evolve towards.
And in terms of what's stopping, I mean, is it you just need to build the capacity out fast enough, or do you still need to educate people as to, the
Excuse
opportunity
me.
and their understanding,
Yeah.
of what it is you're doing and how that can benefit them? What more needs to be done, if you like, to make it expand and at pace?
Yeah. Um, well, we can only do so much at a time, really. So we're very focused on at the moment on three major UK companies. BT being one of them. I think the interesting lesson we've learned is we thought we could generalize what we were doing. If you like, have a one mix would suit everyone, and that simply isn't true, because there are different sort of percentages of components, metals, or even different metals on the difference between a Nokia and a BT card, for example. You have to have a different bacterial mix. So our challenge really is, we've got to figure out. We obviously, the large companies can give you huge inventory and quantities of cards, so we can get it right. But in terms of a universal mix, we're some way off that at the moment. I'm sure we'll get there, but we're really quite customer specific at the moment. So that's one challenge. Secondly, I think we will end up with, to make it easy for the conversation, a gold, silver, and bronze kind of product, which you could almost imagine that the gold will be high-end data center type cards, which are highly valuable, and the process will be relatively quick, right down to the kind of swimming pool size bays, where you could put home waste. Might take 3 months to refine and process, but it gives the end result of you taking out the precious metals from old obsolete phones and things, if that makes sense. We are evolving. I mean, this is so new. We are evolving every day with what we're doing, frankly.
I suppose the one other thing is, I mean, do you have any thoughts as to companies, deciding whether they can, obviously refurbish and use some of their IT elsewhere, or hand on, as opposed to breaking it down and recycling at a very sort of micro level, if that makes sense, just
Yeah, yeah.
how that whole sort of landscape evolves.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think the thing is, in honesty, I think stuff that's, a laptop that's 6, 8 years of age can be, reconfigured, reshaped, wiped. And that happens a lot. There's a big industry for that in the UK. We're really much more into the obsolete equipment. If you look at cards we're using, they've been in telephone systems throughout the UK since the 60s. Do you know what I mean? And old IBM stuff, mainframe stuff from, again, the 60s and 70s. So we're really interested in obsolete stuff. I guess, that metal is repatriated and goes back into, potentially into UK manufacturing. That's our wish, really. Frankly, whoever buys the end product, we can't control where they send it, but at least our government now know we are, endeavouring to keep it on UK soil. So they might, you never know, they might bring out some kind of legislation that says it has to stay here as well.
Yeah, I mean, that was maybe one of the final questions in terms of the circular economy. Do you think
Mm.
it is up to government to sort of put out, as it is with the AI? Clearly, it's got a strategy there. Do you think circular economy wise, it needs to come up with a sort of, whether it's regulation or a series of recommendations to help
Yeah.
grow the whole space, so people understand what is possible?
Yeah, I think the government are really quite on board with this. I can't really go into any detail, but there's obviously, yeah, there's a lot of interest there. We've had a lot of sort of local MPs, and we're having to deal closely with the Environment Agency, and you know, we're getting noticed without having to put in much effort, if that makes sense. And I think I know the reason why. If I'm being really honest, you know, precious metals end up being used in, horrible to say, but I think, you know, it's a very unsafe world at the moment. There's huge announcements about increasing our military spend by billions. The stuff that we, you know, take out of what we do, you know, you could say a considerable amount of it is needed in weaponry. Uh, that frightens the life out of me, really. But that's actually, you know, that's factually correct. So, yeah, and there's also, you know, there's also observations we've made where we can derive precious metals that aren't even mined in this country and only mined in, for example, China stroke India. Now, you know, those metals are very interesting.
Yeah, I guess we're talking. I do some work in the semiconductor industry. I guess you're referring to some of those
Yeah,
things, which yeah, makes
yeah.
complete sense. Yeah, so I mean, maybe just to finish, I mean, you've obviously explained a lot. What would you hope? I mean, if we were to have this conversation, I don't know, in 12, 18 months' time, where would you hope to have, you know, progressed
Yeah.
Bioscope and N2S by then, if you like, if that's fair?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely fair. I mean, I'm very clear where we're going to be. You know, I think Cambridge is pretty full now, so we'll have filled the Bury St Edmunds site, which is our first tester. Really, there's a lot to be thought through. You know, it's a very complicated thing to do. You know, you've got to have basically you've got to culture bacteria, you've got you know, you've got pipe work, there's all sorts of things we've got to kind of understand and get right to make sure our blueprint is resilient. But that's really what the site in Bury will give us. And I think by this time next year we'll have another 100,000 square foot site up and running somewhere in the UK. You know, 2 years, I think we'll probably be up to 3 or 4 sites, and we'll be, you know, flying back and forth to America and hopefully project managing sites over there.
Okay, I mean, it all sounds incredibly exciting. I'm really grateful for the time you've given me, and thanks for sharing so many insights, Simon. So appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Great stuff. Thank you.